The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty station, and Victoria Thompson pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the sun-scorched streets of Bodie, California, with a sinking heart that matched the setting sun casting long shadows across the wooden buildings. It was June 1878, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Pennsylvania to become the bride of a man she had never met, a rancher named Quinton Anderson, who had promised her a home and security in his carefully worded letters. But those letters had been written by his sister, she would learn later, and the reality waiting for her beyond the coach door was something entirely different from what she had imagined during those long, rattling days of travel. Victoria gathered her worn carpetbag and stepped down onto the wooden platform, her legs trembling from both the journey and the fear that had been building in her chest since leaving Philadelphia. She was 22 years old, plain-faced with mousy brown hair that refused to hold a curl, and possessed nothing of value except the dress on her back and the small silver locket that had belonged to her mother. The orphanage where she had grown up had taught her to read and write, to cook and clean, but never to believe she deserved anything more than hard work and humility. A man detached himself from the shadows of the station overhang, and Victoria knew immediately it was Quinton. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pulled low over his face. As he approached, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and serious dark eyes that seemed to assess her in a single glance. "Miss Thompson." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders across open range. "Yes, Mr. Anderson." She tried to keep her voice steady, but it wavered nonetheless. "That would be me." He reached for her bag, and she noticed his hands were calloused and scarred from a lifetime of ranch work. "Welcome to Bodie. We have about an hour's ride to the ranch. If you need anything from the general store, now's the time." "I have no money for purchases," she said quietly, feeling the familiar shame that had followed her throughout her life. She was a charity case, a burden, someone who had nothing to offer except her willingness to work. Quinton studied her face for a long moment, and she could not read the expression in his eyes. "Didn't ask if you had money. Asked if you needed anything." The kindness in those words, delivered so matter-of-factly, made her throat tighten. "I am fine, thank you." He nodded and led her to a wagon waiting on the street. The bed was filled with supplies, bags of flour and sugar, tools, and what looked like new lumber. He helped her onto the bench seat with a gentleness that surprised her, given the roughness of his appearance, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they left Bodie behind, heading into the high desert country that surrounded the mining town, Victoria struggled to find words. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with all the questions she did not dare ask. Finally, Quinton spoke. "My sister Sarah wrote those letters. I expect you figured that out from the handwriting not matching my signature on the marriage license application." "I wondered," Victoria admitted. "She meant well. After our parents died 3 years back, she took it upon herself to manage my life along with the house, decided I needed a wife." He kept his eyes on the road ahead, his voice carefully neutral. "I told her to stop meddling, but by the time I found out what she had done, you were already on the train." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "You did not want a wife." "Did not say that." He glanced at her briefly. "Said I did not appreciate being managed like I was one of the cattle. But what is done is done. You came all this way, and I am not the kind of man who goes back on an obligation." An obligation. The word tasted bitter. She had hoped for many things on the long journey west. A home, perhaps. Companionship, maybe. But she had never imagined being wanted, not really. This confirmation of her fears settled around her shoulders like a familiar old coat. "That came out wrong," Quinton said, and she heard something that might have been regret in his tone. "What I mean is, you are here now. We will make the best of it." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking and rattling over the rough road. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, all sagebrush and distant mountains painted purple by the setting sun. Victoria had never seen country like this, so vast and empty it made her feel even smaller than she already did. "The ranch is called the Double A," Quinton said eventually, seeming to make an effort at conversation. "Been in my family since before I was born. We run about 300 head of cattle plus horses. Got 6 hired men who work the spread and Sarah to manage the house. It is not fancy, but it is a good life if you do not mind hard work." "I have never minded work," Victoria said softly. "It is all I have ever known." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. "Sarah mentioned you grew up in an orphanage." "Yes. In Philadelphia. They were not unkind, but there were many children and never enough of anything to go around." She folded her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. "I worked in a textile mill after I turned 16. Saved what I could, but it was not much. When your sister's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, it seemed like Providence." "What did the advertisement say exactly?" Quinton asked, and there was an edge to his voice that suggested he already suspected the answer. "That you were a successful rancher, kind and hardworking, seeking a wife to help manage your home and provide companionship. That you valued character over appearance, faith over fortune." She paused, then added honestly, "I have little of either fortune or appearance to recommend me, but I hoped character might be enough." Quinton was quiet for so long she thought he would not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with what sounded like anger, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "My sister had no right to make you feel you have to apologize for what you look like or what you own. No right at all." Victoria did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They continued on as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed impossible, like something from a dream. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The main house was larger than Victoria had expected, a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch. There were several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle dotting the hillsides. "It is beautiful," she said and meant it. "It is home," Quinton replied, and she heard the pride in his voice. As they drew closer, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps a few years older than Quinton, with the same dark hair and serious eyes, though her face was more animated, more openly expressive. "You must be Victoria," Sarah called out as Quinton brought the wagon to a stop. "Welcome, welcome. I am so glad you arrived safely." Quinton helped Victoria down from the wagon, and Sarah embraced her warmly as though they were old friends. "You must be exhausted from your journey. Come inside. I have supper ready and a room prepared for you." Victoria allowed herself to be swept into the house, vaguely aware of Quinton staying behind to tend to the horses and unload the wagon. The interior was clean and comfortable, furnished with sturdy handmade pieces and decorated with simple touches that spoke of a woman's care. "I hope the journey was not too terrible," Sarah said, leading Victoria through a sitting room and into a kitchen that smelled wonderfully of baking bread and roasting meat. "I know it is a long way from Philadelphia." "It was manageable," Victoria said, though in truth, parts of it had been grueling. Sarah showed her to a small bedroom on the 2nd floor, simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and washstand. "This will be yours until the wedding," Sarah explained. "Quinton's room is at the other end of the hall. I am just next door if you need anything." "When is the wedding to take place?" Victoria asked, setting down her carpetbag. "Oh, we thought perhaps the end of the week. Give you a few days to rest and get settled. The circuit preacher will be through Bodie on Saturday." "Unless you would prefer more time," Victoria shook her head. "The end of the week is fine. What difference would waiting make? She was here to fulfill a contract, to become a wife to a man who had not wanted one but would honor his obligation nonetheless. That night, dinner was a quiet affair. The three of them sat around the kitchen table, and Sarah tried valiantly to keep conversation flowing, asking Victoria about her journey and telling her about the ranch. Quinton said little, but Victoria noticed he watched her when he thought she was not looking, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, Victoria insisted on helping with the dishes despite Sarah's protests. As they worked side by side, Sarah spoke in a low voice. "I know Quinton probably told you he was not pleased about my interference." "He mentioned it, yes." Sarah sighed. "He is a good man, Victoria." "The best I know. But he has been alone too long, buried himself in work since our parents passed. He needed someone, even if he was too stubborn to admit it." "He does not need me," Victoria said quietly, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. "He needs a wife, perhaps, someone to fulfill a role. But me specifically, I am just the woman who answered the advertisement." "That is not true," Sarah began, but Victoria cut her off gently. "It is fine. I did not come here expecting affection or regard. I came for security and a place to belong. If I can provide useful service in exchange, that is more than fair." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue further, but footsteps on the stairs signaled Quinton's return from settling the evening chores. The conversation ended, but Victoria felt Sarah's concerned gaze on her throughout the rest of the evening. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah showed Victoria around the ranch, introduced her to the hired men who worked the spread, and began teaching her the routines of the household. There was much to learn. The ranch operated with a rhythm all its own, tied to the needs of the animals and the demands of the season. Quinton was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working with his men to move cattle to summer pasture or mend fences damaged by winter storms. When he was present, he was quiet but not unkind, answering Victoria's questions about the ranch and occasionally offering a small smile when she said something that seemed to surprise or please him. She found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. There was something solid and dependable about him, a steadiness that she had never known in another person. He worked harder than any of his hired men, was quick to praise good work and patient when teaching someone a new skill. The men respected him. She could see that clearly, and it spoke well of his character. On the morning before the wedding, Victoria woke early and could not fall back asleep. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, thinking to start breakfast and make herself useful. But when she reached the kitchen, she found Quinton already there, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the distant mountains. "I am sorry. I did not mean to disturb you," she said. He turned, and in the soft morning light his face looked younger, less guarded. "You did not disturb me. I am always up early." "Coffee?" "Yes, thank you." He poured her a cup and handed it to her, and their fingers brushed briefly. Victoria felt a small spark at the contact, surprising and not entirely unwelcome. "Tomorrow we will be married," Quinton said, stating the obvious in a way that suggested he was struggling to find words. "Yes. I want you to know that I will do right by you, Victoria. You will have a home here, security. I am not a man of many words, and I know I am not easy company, but I will provide for you and protect you. You have my word on that." It was perhaps the longest speech she had heard him make, and it touched her more than she wanted to admit. "I will work hard to be a good wife to you, Quinton." to manage your home well and not be a burden. A burden. He set down his coffee cup with enough force that it clattered against the saucer. Why do you talk about yourself that way? Victoria blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. What way? Like you are something to be tolerated instead of valued. You have said it a dozen times since you arrived. That you have nothing to offer, that you hope to not be a burden, that you are grateful for the obligation. He ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Where did you learn to think so little of yourself? I learned it from being little worth thinking of, she said simply. I am not clever or pretty or accomplished. I have no family, no fortune, no particular talents. I am ordinary in every way, Quinton. Surely you can see that. He stared at her for a long moment, and she could not read the expression on his face. I see a woman who traveled 2,000 miles on the promise of a stranger, who has worked since childhood, saved what little she could, and faces an uncertain future with dignity and grace. I see someone who helps without being asked, who speaks kindly to everyone she meets, who looks at this harsh country and calls it beautiful. He stepped closer, and she could smell the scent of sage and leather that seemed to cling to him. Maybe I do not know you well yet, Victoria, but I know enough to say you are wrong about your worth. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as though she mattered beyond her ability to work or serve. I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything. Just stop apologizing for existing. His voice softened. We are going to be married tomorrow. I would like us to start our life together without you thinking you have to earn the right to be here. You are here because you belong here. That is enough. Victoria wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But a lifetime of being unwanted, of being the extra mouth to feed, the girl no one noticed had carved deep grooves in her soul. Words alone, however kindly meant, could not fill them. Still, she nodded. I will try. That is all I ask. He picked up his coffee cup again, then seemed to hesitate. Victoria, I know this is not the romantic beginning you might have dreamed of, but I want you to know that I will try, too, to be a good husband, to make you happy here. You do not have to make promises you cannot keep, she said gently. I do not make promises I cannot keep, he replied, and there was steel in his voice that told her he meant every word. The wedding took place on Saturday afternoon in the small church in Bodie. It was a simple affair, attended by Sarah, a few of the ranch hands, and a handful of townspeople who knew Quinton. Victoria wore a dress that Sarah had altered for her, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. As she stood beside Quinton in front of the circuit preacher, repeating words that would bind them together for life, Victoria felt a strange mixture of hope and fear. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes who spoke of commitment and partnership, of two people choosing to walk through life together. When Quinton slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were steady, and he looked directly into her eyes as he spoke his vows. I, Quinton Anderson, take you, Victoria Thompson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to provide for you, protect you, and honor you all the days of my life. She repeated her own vows, her voice barely above a whisper, and then the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife. Quinton leaned down and kissed her, a brief, chaste press of lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. They had a small celebration dinner at the ranch house, with Sarah having prepared a feast that must have taken her days. The ranch hands were jovial, toasting the new couple and telling stories about Quinton that made Victoria laugh and see new sides of the serious man she had married. As the evening wore on and the guests departed, Victoria felt her nervousness increase. She was now a married woman, and there were expectations that came with that state. Sarah had attempted to have a conversation with her about wifely duties, but Victoria had stopped her, explaining that she understood what was expected. Understanding and feeling prepared were different things, however, and as she changed into the simple white nightgown that Sarah had given her as a wedding gift, her hands shook. There was a soft knock on the door that was now the bedroom she would share with Quinton. His room, larger than the one she had occupied, with a big bed and furniture that had belonged to his parents. "Come in," she called, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Quinton entered, still dressed except for his boots and jacket. He looked at her standing there in her nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders, and something flickered in his eyes. "Victoria, we need to talk before anything else." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly self-conscious. "All right." He gestured to the two chairs by the window, and they sat, facing each other in the lamplight. "I know what is generally expected on a wedding night, but I want you to know that I will not press you into anything you are not ready for." She blinked, surprised. "But we are married." "Yes, and we will be married tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. There is no rush." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I want to know you, Victoria, and I want you to know me. I want us to build something real together, not just fulfill obligations." "I do not understand," she said honestly. "You said yourself this marriage was not your choice. Why would you wait when you could claim your rights as a husband?" "Because I do not want a wife who submits out of duty. I want a partner who chooses to be with me." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I know I am not romantic or eloquent. I know this is not the wedding night you might have imagined, but I am asking you to give us time, to let this grow into something more than just a contract." Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. "No one has ever been patient with me before. No one has ever cared what I wanted." "Then they were fools," Quinton said simply. He stood and drew her to her feet, then surprised her by pulling her into an embrace. She stiffened for just a moment before allowing herself to relax against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "We will take this slow," he murmured into her hair. "We will learn each other. And when you are ready, if you are ever ready, then we will move forward. Is that acceptable to you?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, that is more than acceptable." He held her for a long moment, then stepped back. "I will sleep in the chair tonight. You take the bed." "Quinton, no. You work too hard to sleep in a chair. The bed is large enough for both of us." He hesitated, then nodded. "If you are certain." They climbed into bed from opposite sides, maintaining a careful distance between them. Quinton turned down the lamp and darkness filled the room. Victoria lay very still, acutely aware of him beside her, listening to his breathing gradually slow and deepen as he fell asleep. She had expected many things from this marriage, but not kindness, not patience, not a man who would put her comfort above his own desires. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It would be a long time before she recognized it as the first tender shoots of love. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Victoria threw herself into learning everything about running the ranch house, and Sarah proved to be a patient and thorough teacher. She learned to cook for a household of men with appetites honed by hard labor, to preserve food for the lean winter months, to manage supplies and plan ahead. But Sarah had her own plans as well, and about a month after the wedding, she made an announcement at breakfast. "I have decided to accept Thomas Morrison's proposal," she said, referring to a shopkeeper in Bodie who had been courting her for over a year. "We will be married in the fall, and I will move into town." Quinton looked up sharply from his plate. "Sarah, you do not have to leave. This is your home." "It was my home," Sarah said gently, But now it is Victoria's home, and she should not have to share it with her sister-in-law forever. Besides, I love Thomas and I want to start my own life. Victoria felt a pang of panic. She had come to rely on Sarah's guidance, her cheerful presence. But I still have so much to learn. And you will learn it, Sarah assured her. You are more capable than you give yourself credit for, Victoria. You always have been. The summer months were busy ones on the ranch. Quinton and his men worked long days in the high country, and Victoria often did not see her husband except at breakfast and dinner. But those meals became something she looked forward to, times when Quinton would tell her about his day, ask about hers, and slowly, carefully, they began to truly know each other. She learned that he loved this land with a fierce passion, that he had dreams of expanding the ranch and improving the herd. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor, dry and unexpected, that would catch her off guard and make her laugh. She learned that he was scrupulously fair with his men, generous to those in need, and absolutely unbending when it came to his principles. And he learned about her as well. He discovered that she had a gift for numbers and began letting her manage the ranch accounts. He found that she had a gentle way with the horses and started teaching her to ride. He realized that she soaked up knowledge like a sponge, asking questions about everything from the cattle to the weather to the history of the region. One evening in late July, Quinton came home later than usual, and Victoria had kept his dinner warm. As he ate, she noticed he was quieter than normal, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, refilling his coffee. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Had to let one of the men go today. Caught him mistreating a horse. That must have been difficult. Was necessary, but yes, it was difficult. He has a wife and children." Quinton rubbed his face tiredly. "I gave him 2 months' wages and told him if he straightens himself out, I might consider taking him back in the spring. But I cannot have a man working for me who would hurt an animal." "You are a good man, Quinton Anderson," Victoria said softly. He looked up at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "You truly think so? I know so. I have seen how you treat everyone, from the newest hired hand to the oldest horse. You are fair and kind and decent. Your parents would be proud of the man you have become." Quinton stood abruptly and crossed to where she sat. He took her hands and drew her to her feet, and they stood very close in the lamplight kitchen. "Victoria, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When you first arrived, I was angry at Sarah for interfering, angry at the situation. I thought we would make a practical arrangement, nothing more." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "But I was wrong. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you bloom here on the ranch. You are the finest person I have ever known, and I am falling in love with you." Victoria felt her heart stutter in her chest. "You cannot mean that." "I do mean it. I know I have no right to expect you to feel the same. I know I promised we would go slow, and I will keep that promise. But I needed you to know the truth of my feelings." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit or obligation, but found only sincerity. "I do not deserve your love." "Stop," he said, his voice almost harsh. "Stop saying you do not deserve things. You deserve everything good in this world, Victoria. And I know I am not much, just a rough cowboy with dirt under his nails and calluses on his hands. But if you would have me, if you could ever come to care for me, I would spend the rest of my life making sure you know your worth." "Quinton," she whispered, and then, acting on an impulse that surprised her, she reached up and kissed him. It was different from the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was full of longing and promise, a question and an answer all at once. Quinton made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until Victoria felt dizzy with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean? It means I have been falling in love with you too, Victoria admitted. I was just too afraid to believe it could be real. It is real, he promised. This is the realest thing I have ever felt. That night, for the first time, they came together as true husband and wife, and it was everything Victoria had never dared to dream. Quinton was gentle and patient, worshipful in the way he touched her, and she felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Quinton traced idle patterns on her shoulder. "Tell me about your mother," he said quietly. Victoria stiffened slightly, then forced herself to relax. "I do not remember her very well. She died when I was 4. I have only impressions, really. The smell of lavender, the sound of her singing. This locket was hers. She touched the silver pendant she always wore, and your father never knew him. My mother said he was a soldier who died before I was born, but I always wondered if that was just a kind story." She turned to look at Quinton in the dim light filtering through the window. "What about your parents? What were they like?" His face softened with memory. "Good people. Hard workers. My father taught me everything about ranching, about treating people fairly and caring for the land. My mother was like Sarah, always laughing, always finding joy in small things. They died in a wagon accident 3 years ago coming back from town. It happened fast, at least. They did not suffer. I am sorry you lost them." "I am sorry you never really had them to lose," he replied, and the understanding in his voice made her throat tight. As summer turned to fall, Victoria continued to grow into her role as ranch wife. When Sarah married Thomas and moved to town, Victoria found she was more than capable of managing the household on her own. She took pride in it, in fact, in knowing she was contributing something real and valuable to their life together. Quinton continued to court her, even though they were already married. He brought her wildflowers when he found them on the range. He took her riding up into the high country to see the aspens turning gold. He held her every night and told her she was beautiful until she almost began to believe it. One cool October evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Quinton said, "I have been thinking about the future." "What about it?" "I would like to expand the herd next year, maybe build a bigger barn. And someday, when we are ready, I would like this house to be full of children." He glanced at her. "But only when you are ready. There is no rush." Victoria took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We may not have as much time as you think. I have been feeling unwell in the mornings lately." Quinton's eyes went wide. "You mean you are going to have a baby?" "I believe so. I wanted to be certain before I told you, but yes, I think we will be parents come late spring." The joy on his face was unmistakable. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, but she did not complain. "This is the best news," he said against her hair. "The very best news. The pregnancy was not always easy. Winter in the high desert could be harsh, and there were days when Victoria felt too ill to do much more than lie in bed. But Quinton was attentive and tender, bringing her tea and crackers, rubbing her feet when they ached, reading to her from the newspapers he brought back from town. Sarah visited often, delighted to share in the preparations for the baby. Together, the two women sewed tiny clothes and blankets, turning one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery. Thomas proved to be a good match for Sarah, kind and jovial, and watching the two couples together gave Victoria a deep sense of contentment. She was no longer the uncertain woman who had stepped off the stagecoach, barely believing she had a right to exist. She was Victoria Anderson, wife and soon-to-be mother, a woman who was learning day by day that she had value beyond what she could provide for others. The baby came in May of 1879, during a warm spell that had the wildflowers blooming early. Victoria's labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Quinton paced outside the bedroom door while Sarah and the midwife from town attended to Victoria, and she could hear his worried voice even through her pain. But when the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and his father's dark hair, all the pain seemed worth it. Quinton came into the room with tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and when Sarah placed the baby in his arms, Victoria saw her strong cowboy husband absolutely undone with love. "He is perfect," Quinton whispered, gazing down at their son. "Victoria, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Quinton's father, and from the moment of his birth, that little boy was utterly adored. Quinton proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with James when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every spare moment simply holding his son. Victoria watched her husband with their child and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her family. These were her people. She belonged here in a way she had never belonged anywhere. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch thrived. Quinton did expand the herd, and with Victoria's careful management of the finances, they were able to add to their land holdings as well. The double became known throughout the region as one of the finest cattle operations, and Quinton's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock brought buyers from as far away as San Francisco. But success never changed Quinton's fundamental nature. He remained the same steady, hard-working man Victoria had married, though perhaps a bit quicker to smile, a bit more likely to laugh. He told her often that she had brought joy into his life, but she knew the truth was more complicated than that. They had brought joy to each other, two people who had found in their partnership something neither had expected. When James was 2 years old, Victoria found herself expecting again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1882, Victoria felt she had truly come full circle from the frightened woman who had arrived in Bodie all those years ago. They named the baby Ruth, after Victoria's mother, and she had her mother's light brown hair and bright blue eyes. James was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, and Quinton joked that they would need to build an addition onto the house at the rate they were growing. The years flowed on, marked by the seasons of ranch life. There were good years and hard years, times of plenty and times when they had to tighten their belts. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated when the cattle prices were high and strategized when they were low. Through it all, Quinton kept his promise to spend his life proving Victoria's worth. He consulted her on every major decision, valued her opinion, and made sure she knew every single day that she was loved and appreciated. When she struggled with old doubts, he was there to remind her of her strength. When she achieved something new, he celebrated with her. One evening in the summer of 1885, they sat together on the porch as they had so many times before. James, now 6, was playing in the yard with Ruth, who was 3 and fiercely independent already. Victoria leaned against Quinton's shoulder, feeling perfectly content. "You ever think about that day you arrived?" Quinton asked. "What you must have felt, coming all this way to marry a stranger." "I think about it sometimes," Victoria admitted. "I was so afraid, so certain I was making a terrible mistake. And now," she turned to look at him, this man who had shown her what love truly meant. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything, Quinton. A home, a family, but most of all, you gave me myself. You saw worth in me when I could not see it, and you never stopped showing me until I could see it too. You always had worth, Victoria. I just helped you recognize it." He kissed her temple. "You saved me too, you know." I was so closed off after my parents died, so focused on just working and surviving. You taught me how to live again, how to love." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. James had found a frog somewhere and was trying to show it to Ruth, who was squealing with a mixture of delight and disgust. The sound of their laughter carried across the yard, sweet and clear. "I want to tell them someday," Victoria said quietly, "about how we started. I want them to know that love is not always instant, that sometimes it grows slowly, carefully, until one day you realize it has become the foundation of your entire life." "We will tell them," Quinton promised. "And maybe it will help them understand that worth is not something you are born with or without. It is something you claim for yourself, with the help of people who truly see you." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in those impossible colors Victoria had first seen all those years ago, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in Bodie doubting her worth, a woman who believed she had nothing to offer but service and obligation. But Quinton had spent their years together proving her wrong. Not through grand gestures or flowery speeches, but through steady devotion, through seeing her clearly and loving what he saw, through partnership and respect, and the thousand small kindnesses that made up a life together. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. James grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, often following Quinton around and trying to help with chores, even when he was too small to be much use. Ruth was her mother's daughter, sharp with numbers and insatiably curious about everything. In 1887, another daughter arrived, Helen, who had Quinton's serious dark eyes and Victoria's quick smile. By then, James was 8 and Ruth was 5, and both of them were convinced the baby had been born specifically for their entertainment. The ranch continued to prosper under Quinton's steady leadership and Victoria's careful management. She had long since taken over all the bookkeeping and business correspondence, freeing Quinton to focus on the cattle and land. They made a formidable team, and more than one businessman who had come to the double expecting to negotiate only with Quinton had been surprised to find his wife equally knowledgeable and considerably shrewder. Victoria had also become known throughout the region for her kindness to those in need. When harsh winters or bad luck left families struggling, she was always the first to show up with food and supplies, never making it feel like charity, but rather like neighbors helping neighbors. Quinton supported these efforts wholeheartedly, proud of his wife's generous heart. Sarah and Thomas remained close friends, visiting often from town. Sarah had 3 children of her own now, and the cousins delighted in playing together whenever they had the chance. Sarah often told Victoria how proud she was of the woman she had become, though Victoria always insisted she had simply become herself. One particularly memorable day in the spring of 1890, when Victoria was 34 and Quinton 38, they took the whole family on a picnic up into the high country. It was a beautiful spot Quinton had discovered years ago, a meadow filled with wildflowers and bordered by aspens, with a view that seemed to stretch forever. James, now 11, immediately went exploring with his father, the two of them examining the land with the same critical eye. Ruth at 8 was collecting flowers for her mother, while 6-year-old Helen chased butterflies with joyful abandon. Victoria spread out the blanket and began unpacking the food she had prepared, watching her family with a heart so full it almost hurt. Quinton caught her eye from across the meadow and smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her, and she felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt all those years ago when he first told her he was falling in love with her. After they ate, The children went back to playing, and Quinton and Victoria lay on the blanket together, looking up at the impossibly blue sky. "I have been thinking," Quinton said, "that we should start teaching James more about actually running the ranch. He is old enough now to take on real responsibilities." "He would love that," Victoria agreed. "He worships you, you know, wants to be just like you." "God help him if he ends up like me," Quinton said with a laugh. "But I hope I can teach him what my father taught me. About the land, about treating people right, about building something that lasts." "You have already taught him those things just by being who you are," Victoria said. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You are a wonderful father, Quinton. I hope you know that. I had a good teacher in my own father, and you are a wonderful mother. Our children are lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Victoria said softly. "Every single day I wake up and cannot quite believe this is my life, that I get to have this, all of this." Quinton pulled her down for a kiss, gentle and sweet. "Believe it. You earned it." "I did nothing to earn it except show up. You showed up and then you stayed and you worked and you loved and you built a life. That is everything, Victoria. That is more than most people ever manage." As the afternoon sun slanted through the aspens, casting dappled shadows across the meadow, Victoria rested her head on her husband's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. Their children's laughter echoed through the trees, a sound of pure joy that seemed to bless the very air. She thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that stagecoach in Bodie so many years ago. That girl who had believed herself worthless, who had expected nothing but duty and obligation from her marriage. If she could go back and tell that frightened young woman what the future held, would she even have believed it? Probably not. But that was all right. Some things had to be lived to be understood. The seasons turned as they always did. 1890 gave way to 1891, then 1892. James at 13 was already taller than his mother and showed every sign of eventually matching his father's height. He worked alongside Quinton every day now, learning the business of ranching from the ground up. He had his father's steady temperament and his mother's head for figures, a combination that would serve him well. Ruth at 10 had declared her intention to become a teacher, inspired by the circuit teacher who came through Bodie twice a year. She devoured every book she could get her hands on, and Victoria and Quinton had already begun discussing sending her to a proper school when she was old enough. Helen at 8 was the most adventurous of the three, fearless and full of energy. She could ride as well as her older brother, and was constantly getting into harmless mischief that kept her parents alternately exasperated and amused. In the fall of 1892, Quinton and Victoria celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. Sarah and Thomas hosted a party for them in town, and it seemed like half of Bodie turned out to celebrate. The shy mail-order bride and the reluctant rancher had become pillars of the community, respected and loved for their fairness and generosity. As they danced together in the town hall, Victoria marveled at how natural it felt to be in Quinton's arms, how right. 14 years of marriage had only deepened their connection, worn smooth the rough edges of their early uncertainties, until what remained was solid and unshakable. "Happy?" Quinton asked, guiding her through a turn. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied honestly. "Good, because I plan to keep you happy for at least another 50 years. "Only 50, she teased. "Well, I figure at that point we will have to renegotiate the terms," he said with a grin, and she laughed, drawing admiring glances from others in the room. That Victoria Anderson could laugh so freely, so openly, was a testament to the journey she had traveled. The woman who had arrived in Bodie barely believing she had a right to smile was gone, replaced by someone confident and assured, someone who knew her own worth because she had claimed it, and because the man she loved had never let her forget it. The next few years brought changes, as all years do. James, at 16, was practically running the ranch alongside his father, a capable young man who had earned the respect of all the hired hands. Ruth had indeed gone away to a boarding school in Sacramento, though she came home every summer and holiday, always with new knowledge to share and stories to tell. Helen, at 11, was starting to show signs of her mother's organizational skills, helping Victoria manage the household accounts and supplies with an efficiency that belied her age. In 1895, tragedy struck when Sarah fell ill with pneumonia. Victoria rushed to town and stayed by her sister-in-law's bedside for weeks, nursing her through the worst of it. Quinton managed the ranch and the children, bringing them to visit when Sarah was well enough to see them. Sarah pulled through, but the illness left her weakened, and she was never quite the same afterward. The experience reminded Victoria and Quinton of how precious their time together was, how important it was to cherish every day. They made a conscious decision to slow down a bit, to delegate more to James and the hired men, to spend more time simply being together as a family. They took more picnics up to the meadow, more rides through the high country, more evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun set. Victoria had begun writing down the stories of their life together, creating a record for their children and future grandchildren. She wrote about arriving in Bodie, about those first uncertain weeks, about falling in love with the land and the man who had claimed it. She wrote about each of their children's births, about the challenges they had faced and overcome, about building a life from almost nothing. Quinton would sometimes read over her shoulder, making suggestions or adding details she had forgotten. It became a project they worked on together, their shared history taking shape on the pages. In 1897, when Victoria was 41 and Quinton 45, James, at 18, married a young woman named Catherine from a neighboring ranch. It was a love match, which pleased both Quinton and Victoria enormously. They had raised their son to value partnership and mutual respect, and it showed in his choice of bride. The young couple settled in a house they built on double a land, and James continued to work the ranch with his father. When Catherine became pregnant the following year, Victoria felt the sweet anticipation of becoming a grandmother. Ruth graduated from her school with honors and returned to Bodie to take a position as the town's first permanent teacher. She was 21, confident and educated, everything Victoria had hoped her daughter would become. Watching Ruth stand in front of a classroom, inspiring young minds, filled Victoria with a pride that was almost overwhelming. Helen, at 15, was beginning to show interest in a young man who worked as a deputy sheriff in town. Quinton was predictably protective, but Victoria could see that the young man was respectful and hardworking, and she counseled her husband to give their daughter room to make her own choices. The grandchildren started arriving in 1898. James and Catherine's first child, a boy they named Quinton after his grandfather, was born in the spring. When Quinton held his namesake for the first time, Victoria saw tears in her husband's eyes, and her own vision blurred with emotion. More grandchildren followed over the next few years. James and Catherine had 3 children in total. Ruth eventually married a fellow teacher, and they had 2 children. Helen married her deputy, who became sheriff, and they had 4 children who were as adventurous as their mother. Through it all, Quinton and Victoria remained the steady center of their growing family. The ranch continued to thrive, now being run primarily by James with Quinton's guidance. Victoria had handed over most of the household management to Catherine and Helen, though she still kept a hand in the accounts. They had more time now for each other, and they used it well. They took trips to San Francisco and Sacramento, seeing the cities and marveling at how the world was changing. They visited the coast and saw the ocean, which Victoria had dreamed of since childhood. They traveled back east so Victoria could see Philadelphia again, and she stood outside the orphanage where she had grown up, reflecting on how far she had come. One evening in the summer of 1905, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set as they had done countless times before, Victoria took Quinton's hand. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and work and life. "Do you remember what you said to me the morning before our wedding?" Victoria asked. Quinton thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things that morning. You said you would spend your life proving my worth." "I remember." He squeezed her hand gently. "I want you to know that you succeeded." "Long ago, actually, but I wanted to make sure you knew." She turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner for 27 years. "You showed me I had value, Quinton. You taught me to see myself as worthy of love and respect and happiness. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected gently. "You think you were the only one who needed to learn your worth. I was just a rancher, Victoria, focused on work and duty and responsibility. You taught me joy. You taught me that there was more to life than just surviving. You made me whole." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the colors they had watched together for nearly 3 decades. Around them, the ranch bustled with activity. Their children and grandchildren, the hired hands, the cattle, the horses. All of it, the life they had built together from a beginning neither of them had chosen but both had claimed. Victoria thought about worth, about how she had arrived in Bodie believing she had none, and how Quinton had spent their years together showing her the truth. But she understood now that worth was not something one person could give another. It was something you discovered in yourself, with the help of someone who saw you clearly and loved what they saw. Quinton had not given her worth. He had helped her find it, had held up a mirror so she could see herself through his eyes, had been patient while she learned to believe what he had known all along. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Quinton and Victoria grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, then their 40th. Their children thrived, their grandchildren grew, and eventually great-grandchildren began to arrive. The Double A ranch was passed down to James, who ran it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. Ruth's school became one of the finest in the region. Helen's husband retired as sheriff after a long and distinguished career. Through it all, Quinton and Victoria remained devoted to each other. Age slowed them down, limited what they could do physically, but it never dimmed the connection between them. They still sat on the porch together every evening, still held hands, still found new things to talk about after all their years together. In the spring of 1915, as Victoria approached her 59th birthday and Quinton his 63rd, she fell ill. It started as a simple cold but quickly developed into pneumonia, the same illness that had nearly claimed Sarah years before. Quinton stayed by her bedside night and day, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories of their life together. Their children came, their grandchildren, the house filling with the family they had created. On a warm May evening, with Quinton holding her hand and their children gathered around, Victoria slipped quietly away. Her last words were to Quinton, a whispered thank you for everything, and he had kissed her forehead and told her he loved her, had always loved her, would always love her. Quinton buried his beloved wife on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where they had often picnicked with their children. The whole community came out for the funeral, testament to the woman Victoria had become, the lives she had touched, the love she had given so freely once she had learned she had the right to give it. After Victoria's death, Quinton struggled. He had lost his partner, his best friend, the woman who had transformed his life. But he found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. He told their stories to anyone who would listen, making sure that Victoria's journey from doubtful mail-order bride to confident matriarch would not be forgotten. He lived for 3 more years, still active and engaged with the ranch and the family. On the evening of his death in 1918, he sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as he and Victoria had done so many times. One of his grandsons found him there, peaceful and still, a slight smile on his face as though he was seeing something beautiful just beyond the horizon. They buried Quinton next to Victoria on that hill, and the whole family gathered once more. James, now 59 himself and a grandfather many times over, stood at his parents' grave and told the story one more time. The story of a woman who had arrived in Bodie doubting her worth, believing she had nothing to offer beyond service and obligation. The story of a cowboy who had spent a lifetime proving to her that she was valuable, precious, worthy of love and respect and all good things. But more than that, it was a story of partnership, of 2 people who had chosen each other day after day for nearly 4 decades. Of building a life together through hard work and dedication and abiding love. Of creating a family and a legacy that would extend far beyond their own years. The Double A Ranch continued to thrive under James's stewardship, then passed to his son, young Quinton, and then to his children. Each generation was told the story of their great-great-grandparents, the mail-order bride and the cowboy who had built it all. Victoria's journals, carefully preserved, were passed down through the family. In them, future generations could read about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1878 and trace her transformation into someone who knew her own worth and lived her life with confidence and joy. They could read about Quinton's patience and devotion, his steady love that never wavered, his commitment to honoring the woman he had married even when that marriage had started as an unwanted obligation. And they could see, in the pages of those journals and in the legacy of the ranch and the family, proof that love is not always instant or easy. Sometimes it grows slowly, carefully, nurtured by respect and partnership and daily choice. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not about passion at first sight, but about 2 people who see each other clearly and choose to build a life together anyway. Victoria had arrived in Bodie doubting her worth, and Quinton had spent their lifetime together proving it. But in the end, they had both discovered something more important. That worth is not measured by what you offer or what you can do for others, but by the simple fact of your existence, your inherent value as a human being deserving of love and respect and happiness. That truth, hard-won and carefully learned, became the foundation of their family for generations to come. And in the high desert country of California, on a ranch that still bears the name Double A, the legacy of Victoria and Quinton Anderson lives on, a testament to the transformative power of patient, steadfast, enduring love.